Sunday School teacher, I'm glad that you've joined us for our time of study and preparation. We continue in the book of Ephesians. We're looking at the lesson for Sunday, October the 27th. The title of this lesson is Walking Differently. And the point, this is an important point for us to get here as we prepare. Believers are to live a life that is different from those who reject Christ. And we got to remember that Paul is writing to a group that is formerly unchurched, non-Christian, pagan people. And so we need to remember that most of the Christians in Ephesus had been converted as adults, and many of them came from pagan lifestyles. And so he's writing to people who were living one way and now they're having to live a different way. And so Paul is saying to them, you need to be living differently. And that's the point, is that as believers, we are expected to behave differently. And as Paul mentions here, it's not always easy to go against the crowd. Paul provided them with some strong encouragement about the urgency of living in ways that are different from those who reject Christ. So here in these verses, Paul addresses the issue of Christ-like behavior being demonstrated in the ways that Christians relate to each other. So let's look at these. Chapter 4, verses 17 through 19, and there we see Paul talking about the old. And we're not talking about the age, we're talking about the old ways. So verse 17, he says, "Therefore I say this, and testify in the Lord. You should no longer live as the Gentiles live, in the futility of their thoughts. They are darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them and because of the hardness of their hearts. They became callous and gave themselves over to promiscuity for the practice of every kind of impurity with the desire for more and more." Here Paul reminds them of the sinful behaviors that characterized their lives before their salvation in Christ. In verse 17, he begins by saying therefore, and that therefore signals another way that Christians should live out their salvation. He makes the statement in verse 17, "I say this and testify in the Lord." Paul, this is a very heavy statement because what he's saying there is he's not